Hey there, STEM enthusiasts! Welcome back to Kameron's Lab, Dive In, the go-to podcast for STEM students, crafted with passion by one of your own. I'm Kameron, your enthusiastic and ever-curious host. Buckle up for today's insightful episode. Ready to dive in?
Okay, hello and welcome everybody to our AI ethics session today. We're just going to give it a few minutes for people to come into the room. I can see the number of participants here on my screen going up, so we'll just give it a couple of minutes for that number to stabilize, and then I'll know that we are ready to get started. So just a couple of minutes and I'll be back with you. Okay, it looks like that number is starting to stabilize. So we'll get things kicked off because I know we've got a lot to cover today. But once again, thank you all for joining us for today's session on AI ethics. Today's event is part of an ongoing webinar series exploring Queen Mary's breakthroughs in AI. Our previous recordings are available on demand. So my name is Kameron, and I am a student recruitment marketing manager here in the Faculty of Science and Engineering at Queen Mary. So delighted to be here with you today, and I personally am really looking forward to this discussion. The ethics of AI is something that fascinates me, and so I'm really excited to hear from our panel today. We've got a great panel for you, two celebrated academics. We have Michaela MacDonald and Fernando Barrio, and then we have one of our students, so it's final year biomedical engineering student Kameron, who will be leading today's session. Any of you that have attended our previous webinars will know what a great host Kameron is, so knowledgeable and so engaging, so you're in for a real treat today. So before we get started, I'm just going to do a little bit of housekeeping. So today's session is scheduled to be about an hour. So the first 45 minutes or so will be kind of a guided conversation, which Kameron will be leading. And then if questions come up during the session, I would ask you to use the Q&A function that you can find within Zoom and start posting your questions there. I will keep an eye on them during the session, but what we'll try and do is we'll keep the 15 minutes at the end to work our way through those questions that come up. We'll try and answer as many as we can in the time that we have, and apologies in advance if we don't manage to get to your question this time. Please also note that the webinar is being recorded, so this means that it will be available on demand for you to watch again, to share with your friends, to share with your networks, and you will be sent the recording via email once the event has finished. So without further ado, I will stop there, and I'm going to hand over to our student and budding AI expert, Kameron, to get us started today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kieran. That was a really nice introduction. I'll just continue introducing myself before I introduce our two esteemed experts from AI field. So as he mentioned, I am a final year biomedical engineering student here at Queen Mary. I love learning languages, both lingual and programming based, which I think is one of the things that makes me love AI so much. So I'm bilingual in both English and Spanish, and also have experience with Python and C#. Because of my interest in AI, I've started a podcast called Kameron's Lab, Dive In, where I interview different industry experts, such as the two that we have with us today. So allow me to introduce first Dr. Fernando Barrio, who is currently a reader in sustainable business law and policy at Queen Mary. And he brings with him a wealth of knowledge in the global regulation of information technologies, intellectual property, and human rights. His focus on the legal and policy issues of digital technologies, especially AI and renewable energies, is particularly pertinent to today's discussion. His international perspective, shaped by extensive academic and professional engagements in countries like Argentina, Japan, Thailand, Sub-Saharan Africa, and the UK, offers a unique lens on the intersection of technology, sustainability, and law. We also have with us today Dr. Michaela MacDonald, who is a lecturer here at Queen Mary and Beijing University of Post and Telecommunications. She specializes in interactive entertainment law, AI, robotics, and cybersecurity law. Her research on the societal impacts of disruptive technologies, including virtual property, cloud computing, and smart contracts, provides critical insights into how emerging technologies challenge traditional legal frameworks. She's also the editor for Interactive Entertainment Law. So those of you who don't know what it is, it's a peer-reviewed hub for legal analysis of interactive entertainment, video games, virtual reality, augmented and mixed realities, and all that really exciting things that I'll be sure to ask her a little bit later. So thank you both for joining me. I'm really excited to have you. So what I would like to do first is start off with, if I could ask a question to the two of you, which would be to ask, what is AI ethics? For those of us that don't know, I feel like it's a bit of a buzzword now, and we haven't really pinned it down. So would one of you mind just explaining what that means to you, AI ethics?
I'm going to be, really quick, just a couple of words. Ethics in general refers to, set of principles that determine what is considered to be wrong, what is considered to be right, in relation to individuals or an entity's behavior. In connection to AI, I think on a sort of very high level, it refers to guidance on how to design, develop, and deploy ethical AI, and also how to use it ethically now and in the future. I think that's like a very, very broad definition. Fernando, over to you if you have anything.
If I can add some to that, so a bit more generic. So if we think about the moral issues and the social impact that arising from this wave or tsunami of AI that we are in the middle of. And at the core of that is this idea that how can we ensure, at the core of AI ethics, is how can we ensure that AI benefits humanity, respects values, and doesn't harm, or harm at least as possible. And that is probably at the core of AI ethics, or what we understand by that, Kameron.
Well, thank you for explaining, just to make sure we have a pretty good background. And then Dr. Michaela, I wanted to ask if you could start by giving us an overview of the current landscape of AI ethics in terms of societal impacts. Are there any common concerns that you've noticed so far?
So after, following on this definition or broad description of AI ethics, I think the main challenges associated with this, particular endeavor is how can we take these quite high-level initiatives, and there are, hundreds of initiatives addressing AI ethics around the world in different jurisdictions or authored by different organizations, and actually translate them into very specific design requirements and technical fixes and technical approaches, or even codes for developers. How to navigate this entire field. So I think, again, approaching it from a very general perspective and point of view, I think the main challenge about AI ethics is to really understand what it means in practice. And I think in that respect, standards and standardization is going to be the key in terms of rulemaking and governance of AI development and use, because it's going to provide quite practical context for AI system developers, providers, but also anyone that's going to be part of the AI supply chain, the ability to provide assurances, that we are in compliance with our legal and regulatory obligations. And one last thing to mention in the context of ethical use, fair, safe use of AI at this stage is probably the presence of bias. Addressing bias within AI system is one of the core concerns, issues, and can cause a significant harm, as Fernando mentioned in his definition of AI ethics. So it is absolutely essential that the industry and the engineers and designers behind AI systems absolutely sort of earn the public's trust about these systems being safe, being trustworthy, and being used in an ethical way.
I definitely agree. And that actually does lead me on to what I wanted to ask you, Dr. Fernando, because of your own work, which has spanned multiple continents, I could say. So Southeast Asia, India, Sub-Saharan Africa. Could you elaborate on some of the similarities and differences that you've noticed when you're talking about the use of AI and regulation across these different continents? Are there things that you've noticed just dealing with that international landscape?
Well, if we compare the current landscape of AI regulation to what happened in the late 90s and the beginning of the 2000s with the development of internet and what now became pervasive social media, at least we have an agreement. There is a consensus worldwide that AI needs proper guidance and regulation. So back in the late 90s, those of us that started talking about regulation were seen as some sort of the evil side, as there was this pervasive idea that in order to allow technological development, it was better to let them go and not intervene. And with these ideas that, oh, if you intervene, the technology will not properly develop, and a lot of things that were unproven, but ideologically were imposed worldwide. Now what we have at global scale is a consensus that due to different characteristics of AI and the potential impact, it is important to reaffirm that some of the most like Terminator style impact are really fictional. But clearly there will be impact in everybody's life. It's having impact in everybody's life. Don't forget that today AI is being used for almost anything. And therefore, worldwide, there are these concerns, as Michaela was mentioning, bias is one of them, and bias and fairness. I mean, understanding bias as the unfair discrimination based on certain characteristics of the data, that will, in that sense, AI could be biased, and there is a deep concern at global scale about the roots of the bias. Some of them are there as historical data. There's nothing you can do to change that. Then the data representation, and then there is the more human created, which has to do with algorithm design, and then the proper prejudices of those manipulating AI. So there is that sort of consensus, which is, I would argue, is a first, that we have the same sort of consensus, regardless of the political system or even the legal origins or the legal background of different groups. There is a broader consensus of the need to regulate AI, and I think that this is what probably we can rescue. Then, going more specifically about your question, without entering too much at this point of the type of regulation, well, there are different views. So when you have if we talk about across the Atlantic, European Union has created the first AI Act as we know it, and clearly it's based on principles, and those principles have to do with risk and managing risk, different level of risk. In the US, we only have so far the executive order, which means that applies only to the federal government. It is true that it trickles down as large companies that want to have a relationship with the federal government need to comply with them. But we are talking about different levels of regulation and different level of principle too. Then we have some approaches with 3 different laws in China. There are other attempts in the Southern Cone in Latin America. Peru put it in their constitution, some issues related to AI. So the world is moving, and I think that if we try to be positive in this type of general negativity, the fact that everyone is agreeing that we need to do something is something to be cheered.
I definitely agree, especially with the focus on bias. I think that's really good that we're actually starting to think about what impact this has and who it's benefiting and who it's really, I guess you can say, disparaging, like who's not benefiting from it at all. Could you elaborate a little bit more on, I think you touched on it briefly, but this kind of idea of innovation versus regulation? I think that there's an idea of them being against each other, but could you explain a little bit more about your own thoughts? Do you think that they're two separate things, or should they go more hand in hand?
I think that partially, or probably a lot of it is our fault. I mean, the academics. Academics, although many times students don't believe so, we are humans too, and therefore we have our own bias and ideology and the way you were raised, where you were raised. You study everything that makes up your ideology. For some reason, by late in the 90s, came this idea, unproven in fact, that regulation was against innovation. The fact is that anyone who have dealt with business, and that is sometimes important academics to actually engage with external environment, is that the same way that nature abhors vacuum, businesses abhor uncertainty. And regulation gives you certainty. Therefore, the problem, the ideological problem, is that when one starts talking about regulation, and I've been doing this for 20 odd years, people say, oh, are you talking about Soviet type regulation? No. Regulation is a set of guidelines that tell you what you can and you cannot do. In times of innovation, that regulation needs to be more flexible, broader, and then there are other times in which you need to be very specific on certain topics. And I think that this dichotomy between innovation and regulation is a false one that never existed, was created by some ideologically driven academics that sold a lot of books, got their shares, and the impact, we are seeing it today. So the fact that we have social media that is capable of changing the political landscape of countries, the fact that what you think you want might be decided by an algorithm that shows you something close to what you want and is moving you until a point that you want something that was completely different as you started. All that sort of things that are happening today could be traced back to this idea, oh, no, we don't need regulation because that will hamper innovation. Again, that has not been proven, and I think this is also, you could argue that this is ideological in my side. I think that proper innovation, sustainable innovation, and sustainable both economically and environmentally, needs appropriate regulation. And we are seeing it now, finally, in AI.
Okay. And loving this part of the conversation, but I'm going to put a little bit of a tab on it and come back to your own research. So, for example, Dr. Michaela, for yourself, some of your research is focusing on things like video games and augmented reality in that mixed reality space. Could you talk about how AI and ethics intersect in this domain, and what are some of the key challenges that you've noticed in that area?
So in terms of video games, interactive entertainment, AI is quite, it's quite a broad term when you look at the way that it can be used or incorporated within the environment, and how both users, players, and developers can engage with AI. So you could probably say that we can consider the use of AI as players. So imagine that you are playing chess against the AI. So rather than having a human opponent, this is automated. You can choose different levels of difficulties, etc. Then you can use AI to control the non-player characters. So this is slightly different. They're not necessarily your opponents or taking the same role as another players. They are sort of part of the narrative of the story. They can be various foes and enemies that you have to slay or interact with in order to gain points or progress in the game. And for instance, the Genesis system has been recently successfully patented by Warner Bros. For for one of their titles, basically enables personalization of these non-player characters based on the player's previous interaction with the game, the way they sort of navigate the environment, their sort of history, individual history, and user experience. So you never encounter the same enemy. And when you do navigate the game, they know about you. It's a very personalized experience. So that's another example of how AI can be used within video games. Then, of course, there's the whole area of generative AI. Whether it is used by players, these specific tools, whether it is embraced and incorporated by the providers or developers of the game. So they use these tools to develop content, whether it's graphics, designs, textures, voiceovers, music, all these different creative elements within the game. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this particular aspect, but there's been a lot of press recently and a lot of discussion around the use of generative AI with regards to intellectual property rights and how and whether, especially in the US, the use of copyright protected works by generative AI falls within fair use or it doesn't. So there are a number of ongoing lawsuits to address that particular question. There have been also lawsuits and hearings with regards to whether AI can be considered to be an inventor under patent law. So not just only as an author within copyright, but also an inventor within patent law. So we are seeing a lot of pushing boundaries when it comes to the IP system around the world by the use and deployment of generative AI, not just for video games or in the context of video games, but in general. And perhaps the last but least is in the context of games, so going back to the original question, is where the AI is used to create entire video games, from scratch. I think there is a historical project by a former colleague, Mike Cook, that designed AI system called Angelina that has actually designed and produced video games by simply observing and playing existing video games, by interacting with people on social media and using this information and feedback to develop games their own. A really sort of quick point is it's interesting to think about whether and how players and general public will want to interact and consume digital culture produced by AI. Is it going to be great? Is it going to be innovative and very imaginative, or is it going to be a lot of recycling of existing materials? I don't have the answer for that. And in terms of particular legal challenges, when thinking about video games in particular, this can be linked potentially to general issues such as dark patterns and online harms. So designing digital environments in a way that can potentially encourage or embed behavior that sort of exploits the consumer or is detrimental to the consumer, whether economically, so for instance, encourages them to spend more or to play more or not being able to stop playing, and so on. So general issues and challenges that we see arising from the use of AI in terms of consumer protection, data protection, etc. But in the environment of player interaction, player dynamics within the game. This obviously also, can be relevant, the issue of deep fakes and sort of toxic behavior fueled through various fan communities, player communities, and sort of social media, but in relation to playing games and experiencing and interacting with games. That probably would be a very sort of high level overview from my part.
Well, thank you for that. And I think I like that you mentioned a lot about like the being able to use users' data when they're playing these video games. It's a little bit like what Dr. Fernando mentioned before, just that pattern recognition and using that data for, I guess, whatever application you wanted to use it for later. And that does also bring me to your research, Dr. Fernando. So for example, I noticed that you looked a lot into smart farming. I wanted to ask if you wouldn't explain what smart farming entails and then talk a little bit about the privacy and data protection side for that.
Well, smart farming, and then we will link it back to AI. Smart farming is the intensive use of information technology for agricultural production. Very simple definition. If not, we will have to get half of those books to define it properly. It's also called precision farming. There are many definitions. What happened is, we explain it very simply. Let's go back to history. Actually, I like history more those technology. Before the Industrial Revolution, people used to produce in different plots according what that plot could produce best. Then the Industrial Revolution implied, and the Agricultural Industrial Revolution implied the possibility of plowing large extenses and treat them all as the medium. Some pieces of land get more rain than others, and the quality of the soil is better or worse, but the system treats them all the same. Nevertheless, because of the scale, the production increase exponentially, and we have the benefits of that. However, technology and AI allows you to take vast and very extensive land plots, but treat each meter individually. So when you are, for example, applying fertilizer, you apply exactly the amount of fertilizer that each meter needs according to the intrinsic characteristics of the soil. That, of course, needs sensors. Other thing that you can do is use drones to measure different parts of a plot or cattle. And everything that you see I'm mentioning is based in collecting data. Some of those who analyze the problem tend to think, well, agricultural data per se is not personal data. So let's leave that for a while. We will go back to that. But one of the issues that we have is that those various sensors, I just mentioned two, drones and actual sensors, but there are many others, can capture data of people around the field, data about the farmer itself when it's moving around. And therefore, that is one issue that data protection have to deal with. So incidental capture of data, there are case law already decided. Still, if you knew that data can be collected, even if it is incidental, it could be a violation of the UK GDPR. Now, let's go back to this idea. Well, agricultural data is not personal data. But if I can access the data that tells me how much you are planting, how much you are producing, I know your income. And I know your address too. So there are a lot of data that seems to not be personal data, that when you combine it and you have it at large scale and accessible, becomes personal data too. Taking into account that personal data is defined as such that can identify a person. And therefore, there are many pieces of data that before in agriculture were not personal data. And because the use of technology and the combination of AI, remember, AI is just, I will oversimplify it, it's a little more complex, but it's just algorithms that look for patterns or in large amounts of data, which we will leave it as a footnote for the issues of IP, because I have a very strong view on that, as you can imagine. But in smart farming, AI also have another set of consequences that are not necessarily related to personal data. Smart farming is being used to decide what and when to plant, for example. So let's imagine that due to tainted data or wrong data or a problem in the algorithm, AI decides, and let's do this because you will argue that AI doesn't decide. At the end of the day, it's a human looking at AI, but there is a lot of studies that humans tend to not contradict AI. And therefore, AI decides to plant a particular, or to produce a particular plant, and then at country level or at large scales. And then there is something wrong with the data, and therefore we have a famine created by AI. So who's responsible? So it goes beyond just data protection. The consequences of AI in certain areas, like food production, could be very grave. And therefore, there is a discussion to be had across the channel. I'm in the limit between Essex and Suffolk now, so I'm just looking at Europe, a continental Europe. So across this channel where I am, there is a discussion that we need to have whether using AI in agriculture is always high risk in the definition of the European Union AI Act. And these are discussions that we need to have, and they need to be based in evidence and in proper academia.
Definitely agree, especially what you were mentioning at the end there with the use of AI for agriculture. There's this idea that you could have, like you mentioned, food disparities, like who gets to have certain things planted in certain times. And it's just very worrying as well to be able to use that technology. But I suppose it's a double-edged sword in that way. What I wanted to ask next was a little bit of a link between the two of you and talking about who is responsible when these technologies cause such problems. So I think what I learned a little bit later was about like AI insurance. So for example, if something goes wrong with the algorithm, like a certain percent, I think it is, then the company has to pay out a certain insurance. If you could talk about who's responsible when this technology goes wrong, and then how do we decide that? How does that work? At a high level, of course.
I'm just going to use a quick example of how this can work quite well, and that is autonomous and self-driving vehicles. UK introduced Autonomous and Electric Vehicles Act in 2018, which basically stipulates that there is direct liability. So if there is an accident which is caused by a vehicle that is driving itself. Now, the scope of which vehicles are actually going to fall within this category, do they have to be fully automatic or semi-automatic, etc., is open and ongoing. But if such accident occurs, then the insurer of that vehicle is directly liable for damage in terms of the victim, but also in relation to the driver, if the driver is not to blame. And then the insurer, once they settle the claim, they may reclaim the damages from other parties that were liable for the accident. For instance, if that is the case, it can be the vehicle manufacturer. So that is one way how you can deal with risk through contract and through insurance. So rather than having the law to determine who is at fault, creating this legal mechanism of direct liability or liability regime, and introducing a specific type of insurance kind of sidesteps that question, but provides a practical solution which enables or creates a legal environment with certainty, as Fernando already talked about it a little bit, and fosters this particular area of innovation and application, because that is what the end of the day is your main objective. So I think this can work reasonably well in different sectors, potentially healthcare, etc., where you simply say there's going to be compulsory insurance regime, and it will be the insurer that will pay out. And this is also a good business opportunity for the insurance sector, right? Because that allows them to come up with new types of products and services and sort of innovate in relation to these developing legal and regulatory frameworks. So I think this is one good example of how contract and insurance regime can address the risk associated with the deployment of various AI-driven applications or devices, etc.
And just piggybacking off of that question a little bit, someone in the Q&A section, Rasin, he had asked, what ethical measures are taken while collecting data for AI modeling? And then what are the criteria for determining the correct methodology for data collection? So again, it's just looking at how do we make sure that we're, I guess, not leaving out bias completely, because I don't think that's entirely possible personally, but just how would you, what kind of methodology would you use to make sure that you're collecting data ethically and responsibly as well? I'm not sure who would be best to answer that one.
I think that we should go to the School of Engineering and ask. No, but really, so we were talking about bias and the different roots of bias. I mentioned historical data. Well, there is no much that you can do unless, of course, there are ways to correct what all the mistakes that we made through history, and therefore, the historical data that, but you put a standard that said today should be like that, and the algorithm should be able to identify the differences and therefore apply the new standard. Then in the algorithm design, yes, what is the methodology? There are current methodologies and others on development that impose the obligation is sort of a soft because it's not still in law, but impose the responsibility, let's say, of the algorithm designers to make sure that the result of the analysis, the algorithmic analysis, does not result in bias. Then, of course, you have the human prejudices. And for that, unfortunately, it is like when we see institutional racism in institutions. If you read the law, it doesn't say we have to be racist. It's just something that happened because of a collection and accumulation of human prejudices. And this is something that probably, and I will be quite unpopular here, this is something AI needs more investment in soft skills, more in humanities, more in social sciences. So we have all these, for the last 20 years, this crave of, let's STEM. And what we are seeing is that the development without the proper humanities and social science analysis, which has to do with this. So at a technical level, you can deal with algorithm design, data representation, but part of the methodology is bring the philosophers, bring the sociologists, bring the lawyers. And that is a core problem that we have at global scale. If you have nothing to do later, check almost every educational system in the planet is saying, we have to focus on STEMs, and we have the award for STEMs, which is probably partially true. But we are creating a situation with an important part of the solution that is dealing with human prejudices and education and understand historical data is being left over. So part of the methodology is let's go back to the drawing board and let's decide who has to be at the table making the decision. And you will be surprised that shouldn't all be engineers.
I just want to add to that. I think an interesting difference between scientists and social human scientists, social humanity scientists, is that an engineer would probably ask, can I do this? Can I solve this problem? And if so, how? What is the technical solution to this problem? A lawyer, ethicists, philosopher, may ask, should I do this in the first place? Like, is this even a thing that needs to be solved? And if so, what is the host of different solutions out there and different alternatives? And what are their legal, ethical, societal impacts? If I release this algorithm out into the world and hundreds of thousands, millions of users are going to, use it in their daily lives, what kind of impact is it going to, have of them on them in terms of, is it creating fake news? Is it, introducing toxicity into interactions, communications? What is actually going to happen when people start using it? And can I imagine the different ways in which they're going to use them? And how can I then anticipate some of these issues while designing the system in the first place? So I think there is absolutely a need for those that develop and build and implement these systems to have a very broad understanding of humans and society in general.
Totally agree. This interdisciplinary approach, I think it's really important. And you actually jumped ahead in my little question plan. But I wanted to ask if you could suggest ways that students can get involved when they want to have these interdisciplinary approaches. So myself as an engineering student, definitely focus on the how can we get there, but not so much on the, well, no, we are, but the should we get there. So how would you recommend that students can get involved in more of an interdisciplinary way, especially focus on like the Queen Mary side of everything?
I'm not going to spend, I'm not going to take a lot of time because I think there's questions in the chat and sort of nearing almost the end of the session. But I think being curious is a really important thing. Reading and talking to other people. I'm old-fashioned, so I prefer, doing things in person, going and attending perhaps events or activities that are not necessarily within my field, because you always find and learn something new, something different. You can talk about the same problem, the same issue from completely different perspectives. And I think it broadens people's horizons and understanding. So interacting with others and with different types of materials, I think would be my answer.
That's perfect. And so, as you mentioned, I do want to jump back into the Q&A part. So we had one question from Gemma who's asked, where do you see the role of national and international governments in shaping the rules around ethics of AI? So I think we touched on that briefly, but I think if we could go back to it. Dr. Fernando, I think maybe you would be the one to answer this one.
Yes, I think that, again, being a person that strongly thinks that regulation is necessary for proper development of business and technology, I think that the role of government is fundamental. The key is, we are in a complex time. Governments have their views and their focus in too many other things, not necessarily all positive. And I don't want to start talking about governments around the world, because I think that we will turn into a pessimistic view, which is not the idea. I think that governments in general need, and they are, by the way, try to assess what are the potential impacts. For that, they have academics and scientists, both what is called hard science and social sciences around the world dealing with it. They need to start thinking about how AI will impact. One of the important things for governments to develop these sort of regulations is that they need to go beyond the hype. You see, sometimes governments want to look pro-innovation, and therefore they buy the first idea that comes to their doors, And suddenly you have governments, real examples, that are using AI to decide who gets parole or not in the Kentucky system. And then you realize that based on the data, because what the algorithm does is, remember, it's not artificial and not intelligent, it's just an algorithm. So the algorithm does is look for patterns in the data and no coincidentally decide that people are more likely to commit crime according to the color of the skin, which, as we know, is false. It just past data, which is based on prejudices and institutional racism of the system. However, for the algorithm, that is unquestionable. And therefore, governments jump into the use without proper assessing the impact. And we are seeing few things. Nevertheless, that doesn't mean, oh, let's exclude them. It's quite the opposite. I think that we need more involvement of different governments in relation to properly assess and regulate flexibly, pro-innovation, but regulating AI, and without, as I was saying, jumping into the hype and assessing things properly and with time. So one of the things that it is something that Michaela was referring when talking about engineers, but happens also at government level, is what a former president of the United States, when he was asked why he did something that was clearly wrong when he was president, he said, only because I could. And that is problematic. So sometimes engineers are seeing what they can do, and they do it, and then government do what they could.
Definitely a conversation for another day, I think. I think I'll go back to the Q&A section. So one more person has asked, I guess, more the academic side of things. So how can AI be used effectively in academic integrity? I don't know if anybody wants to jump on that one.
I think academic institutions are definitely, tackling this question on daily basis, because it is, AI is transforming every aspect of human endeavor, every sector. So education, higher education is not an exception, and I think perhaps we were a little bit surprised by COVID, by the pandemic, by the move to online and hybrid teaching and learning. I don't think anyone was really prepared for this, educators and students alike. And add to that the use of generative AI, which is widespread. And not necessarily for the right purposes, and that's my issue. There's nothing wrong with AI, and nothing wrong with many of the AI applications. It's just a question of how you use it, for what goal, for what objective. And I think at the moment, while AI has a great potential to aid teaching and learning, I'm not quite sure we necessarily know how to best do that, and a lot of us as educators are not experts either. So there is a lot of focus at the moment on pedagogy, scholarship, and how to harness the power of AI within the relationship between students and lecturers and tutors, etc. And I think all these various policies and guidelines around the use of AI in a way that does not negatively impact academic integrity. That this is an ongoing conversation, and I would lie if I said that I have that I have the answers. But it is a big challenge that we cannot hide away from. We cannot say we're going to ban the use of these tools. That's nonsense. It's the same thing as some suggestions recently that social media should be banned for users under the age of 16. I'm I mean, first of all, I think it's the users under the age of 16 that actually understand the content on social media. So we do need them because a lot of it's aimed, it's aimed at them. And you won't solve anything by banning the use of these platforms and tools, because these incoming generations are born into a world that is digital, that is AI driven, and they need to know how to use it. They need to know what kind of interaction and behavior is acceptable, is okay. So I think rather than banning things, we need to work on developing set of, digital moral values that are fit for this age and empower and enable users to be responsible digital citizens that know how to use this, how to use it for good, how to use it for the good of humanity, and not just say, yeah, we're going to ban this and we're going to pretend that nobody's using ChatGPT to write their essays or whatever, or to write their articles and develop teaching materials, etc. So I think embracing it with the view of looking for positive uses and benefits for everyone is the way forward.
If I may add something to, again, I don't have an answer, just that when this fast started, I think was back in February or so. ChatGPT started in November 2022, and it was back in February 23. I gave a talk at Queen Mary about the use of large language models for education, and particularly for assessment, going back to the issue of integrity. And I think that does, again, maybe asking the wrong question. The question is not how we protect integrity from AI. As Michaela said, AI is there, will be used. I encourage, by the way, my students to use it in class. I said, do use it. Don't waste your time with things that the system can do better than you. But the key there is that we need to redevelop the assessment in such a way that it needs the human originality input. And that is where the problem is. So when the AI system passed the bar examination in New York, everybody started to say, oh, we have to ban it. Nobody questioned the exam. Nobody said, is an exam the best way to assess if somebody is ready to be a lawyer in New York? And this is the core that we keep avoiding, because, of course, it's easier to say, let's ban it, let's pretend that it's not happening. And there is a policy level too, because what I'm proposing, it takes more time. And therefore, that needs to be factored when designing academics contracts. You said, do all academics want to do as I do, kill myself because I have to mark more than 3,000 pieces per semester, because the essay is divided in small pieces where students need to go out and do things that AI cannot do. AI cannot go and ask to a small business in the neighborhood how they are doing and then apply the law. So therefore, I did that. It's killing me. And that is something that we need to probably be talking about. Instead of talking about how to ban it, that was the first wave. Then is let's embrace it, that nobody knows or talking about how. We say, oh yes, now AI is fine. Yes, how we do it? What are the resources needed? And then probably, and problematically, when we talk about resources, we go back to the engineering side. Oh, which machines do we know or we need? And no, it's in this case probably simple time. And then academics do what they do quite well, which is be creative and look for innovative ways. I also have to confess, for years I've been thinking that exams are not a good way to assess at all, and therefore I have a bias. I confess my bias, and I think that again, AI, as in many aspects of society, more than forcing us to look for the answer, is forcing us to think whether we were doing was correct or not. Again, we don't have more time, but I could go into some of the issues that Michaela mentioned in intellectual property before. Is the problem that a machine can patent, or is the problem that inventive step was always just a construction that the AI is showing that if you give somebody the state of the art and apply logic, as is what an AI is doing, you get something that looks innovative, but it was never innovative. It was always just logical application of previous knowledge. And therefore, probably there are things that we need to reconsider. From the assessment point of view and integrity, well, the solution is not banning AI, but start to be very creative in the assessment process, which needs resources, and in our case, is time.
Thank you. And just because we're running very low on time, I'm trying to summarize the last few questions, but they're all quite large. So I think, I'm sorry, everyone, I will just ask one more question for the student perspective. So for students that are looking to get into things like AI ethics, they want to be able to make changes in this space. What kind of skills would you recommend that they have? And how do you say that your courses here, like when you're learning at Queen Mary, what kind of things do we offer here that you could recommend to students to gain when they're joining our courses? I'm not sure who's that.
In terms of skills, I think I'm going to repeat one that I already mentioned, and that is curiosity and thinking out of the box, because as Fernando mentioned, there's a lot of things that today can be done better, faster, more efficiently by using AI. And you shouldn't really spend time, repeating that or trying to compete with that level of capacity and efficiency. But I think in terms of, developing and enhancing what makes us human and distinguishes us from just algorithmic exercise, a glorified spreadsheet that does something really fast, really well, but just follows instructions. Literally, that is what it does. So I think those are skills that will be valued in any kind of field, and that will set you apart from an algorithm that can potentially do the same job better, faster, and cheaper. There are, qualities with regards to interactions with others that we do not want to replace with technology, that we do value and that are important. And I think it is these soft interpersonal skills and sort of general curiosity that will be the most valuable asset. And as I read somewhere today, plumbers will be never out of job because AI can't fix your toilet. So, just in case you're thinking of an alternative career, there's one for you there.
Love that. Not sure if we have time for one more question, Kieran, but I'm going to push it in if I can. I think the last one that I wanted to, I suppose, ask would be, what do we think in terms of just, should we be fearful or hopeful? There it is. Sorry, I was looking in the list for which one it was, but somebody asked if we should be fearful or hopeful at this time, and if we could do like a high level of what you think.
Yeah, we have the same discussion. During COP28, there was a parallel conference was Green Tech, and I was invited to talk exactly about that. Friend of foe, talking about AI. And I think that overall, we should be hopeful, not fearful. If we have to be fearful, it's because there's something that we are not doing, both at the education and regulatory level. AI per se, as was explained, is just a set of instructions and mathematical operations. So what happened with them is what humans decide. And as far as in the educational system, we start to foster skills that AI will never, even if we think about the general AI, which will be like thinking like humans, still will be able to produce something like Mozart, but will not be able to cry when you hear it. And therefore, that is the key that I think that we have to communicate and to give to, particularly to our students and to the rest of society. Focus in what makes somebody else cry, not virtuosity in playing the violin.
Okay.
I am really quickly, I'm also really hopeful because I'm an eternal optimist. So, I think we will be okay.
Thank you.
All right, we are bang on 2:00, so we're going to wrap things up. Thank you everybody for attending our session today. I hope you found it as fascinating and enjoyable as I did. And a really big thank you to the three of you today. Thank you, Kameron, Michaela, and Fernando, for your time, for your enthusiasm, and for sharing all of your expertise. If you enjoyed today's session and the previous sessions, we have one more left in this series. So this coming Thursday, 14th of March at 1 p.m. UK time, there is going to be a session on human-led innovation in AI. So I have just dropped a link in the chat for you to sign up for that final session. Again, it will be taking place on Zoom in a very similar format to this. The AI Hub is live, and you'll be able to access a lot more information about this series on there, and it will all be sent to you as an email communication after the event. So once again, a big thank you to everybody involved today and everybody for their questions. I'm sorry that we couldn't get to all of them, but it's clearly a really fascinating topic to have had so many questions coming up. All right. Thanks. I'm just going to end things now. Bye-bye.
Hi again, awesome listener. That wraps up another deep dive of Kameron's Lab Dive In. Before you dive back into your day, see what I did there? Take a second to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Want a behind-the-scenes look? Bonus content? Or just some good old STEM fun? Follow me on my socials, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Kameron's Lab. And remember, every episode is a new adventure, and we've got some thrilling dives lined up for you. Don't miss out! Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.